What is the price of kindness when it can ruin your entire career? At a poor fire station in Akron, Ohio, Patrick Dunn just finished a tiring night shift. Then, at 6:45 a.m., he meets a 7-foot, one giant struggling with a flat tire. That struggling man is actually Shaquille O'Neal. The NBA legend is secretly looking for a capable leader for his new community safety program. Patrick spends 25 minutes helping him for free. But the next day, he faces a warning from his strict chief for violating liability insurance rules. His chance of a promotion is now in serious danger. Will a firefighter trying to save his station for the poor pay a heavy price for his kindness? Or will the quiet giant step in? To understand why Patrick Dunn would kneel down in the freezing cold to fix a stranger's tire, we need to go back a few weeks. We need to see the long, lonely nights he spent inside Fire Station 4. It was 2:14 in the morning. Fire Station 4 sat on the poor side of Akron, Ohio, far from the bright lights downtown. Patrick wiped down the old hose-on Ranger, their beat-up 2008 fire truck. The paint on Ranger was chipped and faded in long streaks. Patrick rubbed the cold metal with a worn gray cloth. His hands moved slowly because his whole body was tired down to the bone. He had been awake for almost 20 hours straight. His eyes burned. His shoulders ached. But he kept working anyway because the truck had to be ready by sunrise. His bank account held exactly $17.42. That number sat in his head like a stone he couldn't put down. He owed $41,200 on his mother's house loan through Wells Fargo. Every month, the bill arrived right on time, no matter how empty his wallet was. His mother, Martha Dunn, was 71 years old. Her heart was failing, slowly, quietly, in stage 3. Her medicine cost $1,250 every single month, with no room for delay. Patrick made $52,000 a year fighting fires. That came to about $4,300 a month before taxes. The math never worked out, no matter how many times he tried. He kept a small notebook in his locker, where he tracked every single bill by hand. Rent, medicine, gas for his old truck. The numbers never added up the way he needed them to. He had stopped buying new boots 2 winters ago, choosing instead to patch the old ones, with tape whenever they wore through at the toe. Some nights, he skipped dinner just to save a few extra dollars for his mother's pharmacy run. He never complained about it. He just quietly did what needed to be done. Tyler Brooks walked in holding 2 paper cups of weak coffee. Each cup cost $1 from the old machine down the hall. Tyler was only 24 years old, but his shoulders already looked tired like an old man's. Tyler sighed and handed Patrick a cup. The steam rose slowly between them in the cold air. "I heard the city wants to cut $450,000 from our budget," he said. "They want to shut down Station 4 by the end of the month," Tyler added. "All the money is going to the rich side of town instead." Patrick stayed quiet for a long moment. His cracked, calloused hands gripped the cloth tighter. The cold outside had already worked its way deep into his fingers. He set down the cloth and walked over to the response map taped to the wall. He pointed at 2 small red dots near the edge of town. "If this station closes, trucks from downtown will take 18 minutes to reach us," Patrick said. "Right now, it only takes us 4 minutes." 14 extra minutes, Patrick said, his voice low and serious. "That's enough time for 3 wooden houses on Railroad Street to burn straight to the ground." He had seen those same houses up close many times before, with families standing outside in their pajamas, watching everything they owned go up in smoke. Tyler nodded slowly, looking down at his coffee. He didn't have an answer. Nobody at the station had an answer that could fix this. Outside, the wind rattled the old garage door. Snow piled up along the curb in thin white lines. The whole building felt colder than usual that night. Patrick glanced at a faded photo taped near the lockers. It showed his father, also a firefighter, standing proudly beside an older version of this same truck. His father had died young, his lungs ruined by smoke, after 20 years on the job. Patrick never once thought about quitting, even on nights like this one. How much longer could Patrick carry this weight on his shoulders? His own family was drowning in debt. His own mother needed medicine he could barely afford each month. Far away, in a black Lincoln Navigator parked a third of a mile from the station, a very different kind of pressure was quietly building. Shaquille O'Neal sat in the back seat, watching the station through tinted glass. Shaq had built a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He also held a doctorate in education from years of hard study. But none of that mattered for what he needed to find right now. He had spent the last few months interviewing dozens of candidates in fancy boardrooms across the country. Every single one talked about strategy and budgets. None of them talked about people. He didn't want a man with a fancy office and a clean press shirt to run his new program. He wanted someone who actually understood real struggle, real cold, and real hunger. So Shaq came to Akron 3 separate times that winter. Each time, he quietly tested the firefighters at Station 4, without telling a single person who he truly was. The first time, Shaq wore an old gray hoodie he bought for $15 at a thrift store across town. He pulled his cap low to hide his famous face from anyone who might recognize him. He walked into the station and asked for a fire safety map for his neighborhood. Patrick was the one who greeted him at the front desk and offered to help right away. "Take a seat, over there," Patrick said, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. "This will take a few minutes, but I want to get it right for you." Patrick drew every single exit route by hand, slow and careful, explaining each line with patience. He had no idea he was helping one of the most famous athletes alive. He just saw a tall stranger who needed help, and he gave it freely, without expecting a single thing in return. The second time, Shaq sent his assistant, Abigail Clark, to play the role of a struggling mother who had recently lost her job. She asked the station to check her old fire extinguisher at home. Patrick drove out to her address that same afternoon, even though it wasn't part of his official duties. He inspected the old extinguisher carefully and shook his head at how worn it was. Patrick paid $45 out of his own thin paycheck. He bought her a brand new extinguisher on his way home that night. He never told his boss. He never asked for any credit. The third time, Shaq simply parked nearby and watched Patrick through the window for almost an hour. He saw him fix a broken radio for an old man who couldn't afford a new one. He watched Patrick laugh easily with his co-workers, even on a night when everyone looked exhausted and worn down by the cold and the long hours. He saw him hand his own lunch to a teenager who admitted he hadn't eaten since the day before. Patrick never once asked for thanks. He just kept working, quiet and steady. Shaq watched the footage of that quiet kindness later and felt something shift inside him. Now he wondered something else entirely. Could Patrick pass one more test? A much harder test. One that would put everything on the line at once. Before that final test could happen, trouble found Patrick first. It arrived wearing a perfectly clean uniform and carrying a thin clipboard. Chief Raymond Cole was 51 years old. He followed every rule to the exact letter, mostly to protect his own future and his hope of moving to the downtown station. His uniform never had a single stain on it. It looked nothing like Patrick's smoke-stained jacket and worn-out boots. Raymond called Patrick into his office at exactly 8:15 in the morning. He slapped a water bill down on the desk hard enough to make the coffee cup jump. The bill had jumped by $118 that month. "Done. I know you let homeless folks shower here at night," Raymond said. His voice stayed calm, but it cut sharp as glass. "We have a budget review coming next week. If you keep using city property for your little charity, I will pull your name from the promotion list," Raymond warned. "That extra $15,000 a year will simply disappear." Patrick tried to explain himself calmly. "Chief, it was the middle of January. That family had nowhere else to go. I just let them warm up for an hour." Raymond shook his head, unmoved. "I don't need your reasons, Don. I need clean numbers on my budget report. Feelings don't pay the water bill." Patrick stood, with his head down, staring at the worn floor tiles. That $15,000 meant everything to him. It meant medicine for his mother. It meant keeping the roof over her head. He had to choose between two paths. Follow the cold rules and try to save his own family's future, or keep helping strangers and risk losing everything he had worked for. Patrick walked out of that office without saying a single word. The weight on his chest grew heavier with every slow step down the quiet hallway. He sat alone in the break room for 10 minutes, staring at a cold cup of coffee. He thought about his mother's pale face the last time he visited her bedside. He thought about the stack of unpaid bills sitting on her kitchen table, growing taller every single week. Fear sat heavy in his stomach like a stone he couldn't swallow. Would Patrick still find room for kindness in his heart the next morning? Or would fear finally win the fight inside him? The next morning came fast and brutal. It was 6:45 a.m. The temperature outside had dropped to 27 degrees. Frost covered the road in front of the station like a sheet of white glass. Patrick had just finished a 14-hour night shift, the longest of the week. His eyes were red and heavy. His legs felt like stone with every step. He just wanted to get home and finally sleep. He thought about the warm bed waiting for him and the few hours of rest he might actually get before checking on his mother later that afternoon. He pulled his old Ford Ranger toward the front gate, ready to head home. That's when he saw a black SUV parked right outside the station. One tire was completely flat against the icy pavement. A 3-inch nail stuck straight out of the rubber. Standing beside the SUV was a massive man, 7 feet 1 inch tall, weighing over 300 pounds. The man kept his hands buried deep in the pockets of an old gray hoodie. He looked stiff and awkward, trying to bend his huge frame down to check the tire underneath. For a man his size, kneeling down to fix a tire was almost impossible. His knees and his back simply weren't built for that kind of work, no matter how hard he tried. Patrick could have driven right past him without stopping. His shift was finally over. His mother was waiting at home, worried as always. Nobody would have blamed him for just leaving. But he looked at this giant stranger struggling alone in the freezing cold, and something deep inside him refused to simply drive away. Patrick sighed quietly and turned off his engine. He grabbed his jack and his personal toolbox from the back of his pickup truck and walked over. "Hey, big guy," Patrick said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "With your height, don't even try bending down. Let me handle this. Your back will snap before that bolt even moves." The giant spoke in a deep, calm voice that seemed to rumble from somewhere far below. "I don't want to bother you. Did you just finish your shift?" "It's fine," Patrick answered, already kneeling down on the frozen ground. "Just stand over there by the wall. The wind is brutal from this side of the lot." For the next 25 minutes, Patrick knelt on the freezing concrete without complaint. His cracked, frozen hands gripped a rusty wrench, turning each stubborn bolt one slow turn at a time. His knees soaked through with cold water from the melting frost. His fingers turned numb and red, but he kept working without slowing down once. "You sure you don't want gloves?" the giant asked quietly, watching Patrick's bare hands struggle with the icy metal. "Gloves make me clumsy," Patrick said, with a small laugh. "I'd rather feel what I'm doing, even if it hurts a little." The giant stood completely silent the whole time, watching closely from above. His eyes slowly shifted from simple curiosity to something much deeper, something that looked a lot like quiet respect. When the new tire was finally locked into place, Patrick stood up slowly and stretched his stiff back with a grunt. His knees cracked from kneeling so long on the frozen ground. The giant reached into his pocket and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. He held them out toward Patrick with a careful hand. Patrick waved his hand and stepped back firmly. "Keep that, man. I don't take money from someone stuck outside my own fire station. Just drive safe out there." "You sure?" the giant asked again, studying Patrick's tired face closely. "That's a lot of trouble for nothing in return." "It wasn't trouble," Patrick said simply, gathering his tools back into the box. "Everybody needs a hand sometimes. Today it was you. Tomorrow it might be me." Patrick turned and walked toward his truck, his boots crunching against the frost. He never noticed the giant staring after him with a warm, quiet smile spreading across his face. Would this simple act of kindness bring Patrick a reward, or would it bring disaster crashing down on him instead, just hours later? Chief Raymond Cole was watching from the control room window that whole time. The security camera had caught every single minute of those 25 minutes outside the gate. The next morning at 9 a.m., Patrick walked in for his new shift, still tired from the day before. Raymond called him into the office immediately, his face tight and unreadable. A disciplinary form sat already printed on the desk. "Done. You used personal tools and performed technical work outside your duties," Raymond said. tapping his finger on the paper. What if that man sues this station over a bad repair? Public liability rule number 402 is very clear. No outside technical work is allowed under any circumstance, Raymond continued. This counts as a level 2 disciplinary warning on your record. This warning meant Patrick's promotion request was now completely canceled, just like that. He was also suspended for 14 days, without pay, starting that very afternoon. Patrick's hands began to shake at his sides. Chief, that man was stuck right at our exit gate. If a truck needed to leave fast for a call, his car would have blocked the whole driveway. I was just clearing the way for our own trucks, Patrick said, his voice rising slightly. That's all I was trying to do out there. Raymond leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly, over his clean uniform. I don't care about your reasons, Dunn. I care about rules. Rules keep this station open. Feelings do not. He tapped his pen against the desk twice, watching Patrick's face carefully for any sign of weakness or argument. Raymond didn't even look up from his papers again. The report already went to the city council this morning. And by the way, the vote to close Station 4 just passed. You all have until the 30th to find new jobs somewhere else, Raymond said flatly, sliding the form across the desk. Patrick walked out of that office feeling like his whole world had quietly collapsed beneath him. He stood alone in the parking lot for a long minute, watching his breath rise in the cold air. He didn't know how he would even begin to explain this to his mother. How could he face her now, after losing everything in one single morning? He had just lost the only paycheck keeping her medicine stock for the next 2 weeks. Word spread fast across the poor side of Akron that same day. Patrick had been punished, and the station that protected their homes was about to disappear forever from their streets. Tyler Brooks and the other firefighters were furious when they heard the news. They wanted to write a petition right away and march straight to the mayor's office downtown. This isn't right, Tyler said, slamming his locker shut. You helped a stranger in the cold. That's it. That's the whole story. And now you're losing everything because of it. Patrick stopped them before they could even start writing. Don't make trouble over this. You all have families to feed at home. Don't risk your own jobs because of me. Tyler argued for a moment longer, his fists clenched at his sides, but eventually he backed down, trusting Patrick's judgment the way he always had. People from the neighborhood began gathering outside the station gates anyway, standing in the cold, falling snow. Many were the very same families Patrick had quietly helped over the years. They held up cardboard signs with messages scrawled in thick marker. Save Station 4. Patrick Dunn is our hero. Their voices grew louder and louder as the morning wore on. An elderly woman named Dorothy Banks stood near the front of the crowd, leaning on her cane. Patrick had carried her down 3 flights of stairs during a fire 2 winters ago. She held her sign high above her head, even as the cold wind bit at her thin coat. This station saved my life once, she told a nearby reporter. Now we save it back. Other neighbors nodded in agreement, sharing their own stories of Patrick and his crew. A young mother mentioned how Patrick once drove her son to the hospital himself when no ambulance was free. An old man near the back leaned on his neighbor's shoulder, telling anyone who would listen about the night Patrick pulled his cat down from a burning tree. The growing crowd outside only made Chief Raymond Cole angrier by the minute. He called the local police to break up what he called an illegal public gathering. 2 patrol cars pulled up slowly, lights flashing without sirens. An officer stepped out and asked the crowd to move back behind the sidewalk, his voice apologetic but firm. Nobody left right away. They simply stood quietly, holding their signs a little tighter, watching the station they loved with worried eyes. Patrick stood near the window of the locker room, watching through a small crack in the blinds. His chest ached with every slow, heavy breath he took. After paying for his mother's medicine, that week, his bank account held exactly $4.50. He sat down on the cold bench and wondered if kindness was just foolishness in a world built like this. He pulled out his phone and looked at an old photo of his father in uniform, standing tall beside Ranger many years ago. He wondered what his father would have done in his place. Deep down, he already knew the answer. His father never once turned away from someone in need, no matter what it cost him. Who would step in to stop the unfair fire that was now burning through every part of Patrick's life. Inside the black Navigator, Shaq sat in the back seat listening to Abigail Clark read updates from her tablet. Her voice stayed steady, but the news she carried was heavy. Patrick Dunn is suspended 14 days, without pay, Abigail reported softly. His $15,000 promotion is gone, all because he changed your tire that morning. Fire Station 4 will be auctioned off on the 30th, she continued. The starting bid is $1,100,000. Developers already want to build apartments on the land. Shaq stayed quiet for a long time, staring out the window, as thick snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes. His face showed no anger at all, just deep, steady stillness. Abigail watched him carefully, unsure whether to say more. She had worked for Shaq for 6 years and had learned that his silence often meant he was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "Sir," she finally said, "the city council meets again in 2 days. After that, the land goes straight to auction. There isn't much time left to act." She glanced down at her tablet one more time, double-checking the numbers, before speaking again, just to make sure everything was correct. Shaq turned his head slowly toward her. How much would it take to stop the auction completely and buy the land outright instead? Abigail checked her notes again. The city wants $1.1 million as a starting bid. To guarantee the win, without competition, we would need to offer more. Maybe 1.2. Do it, Shaq said simply. Money was never the problem here. Finding someone worth trusting was always the real challenge. He thought back to Newark, where his stepfather, Sergeant Harrison, once told him something he never forgot for the rest of his life. When you have real power, you don't need to shout. You just act. Shaq finally spoke, his deep voice calm, but firm as steel. Call the lawyers at the O'Neill Fund right now. We are not going to argue with this man. We are going to buy the whole game from under him. What secret plan was Shaq about to launch on the very day Fire Station 4 faced its final judgment? Judgment Day arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, cold and gray, over the whole city. The main hall of Fire Station 4 had been cleared out for a press conference. 3 local news cameras stood ready on tall tripods. Raymond Cole stood proudly behind the podium, reading slowly from his printed financial report. Due to a $450,000 budget shortfall, the city must optimize its limited resources. He cleared his throat and glanced briefly at the cameras, clearly enjoying his moment in front of the lights. He had waited a long time for an opportunity like this. Closing Station 4 is a difficult but necessary choice, Raymond continued smoothly, to protect the greater good of this entire city for everyone involved. Patrick stood in the back row beside his co-workers, wearing plain clothes instead of his uniform. His hands were buried deep in his pockets as he watched the old fire truck waiting outside to be towed away forever. Tyler stood beside him, jaw tight, staring at the floor. Neither man said a word. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said 100 times that week. Families from the neighborhood stood quietly behind a thin security barrier, their eyes wet, with tears in the cold morning air. The whole room felt heavy, with defeat and quiet hopelessness. What miracle could possibly happen before the final word was spoken to end this fire station forever? Suddenly, the large garage door at the side of the hall began rolling slowly upward. Bright morning light poured into the room all at once. A massive figure stepped through the growing opening. Every reporter in the room, every firefighter, and Chief Raymond Cole himself turned to look at once. It was the same giant, from the tire, that cold morning. His face was now clear and unmistakable under the bright television lights. It was Shaquille O'Neal. A young reporter near the front dropped her notepad in shock. Someone in the crowd whispered his name out loud, and the whisper spread through the room like fire through dry grass. He walked in calmly, with no bodyguards trailing behind him. Only Abigail Clark walked beside him, carrying a black leather briefcase close to her chest. Raymond froze completely, his mouth hanging open, unable to speak a single word. Shaq leaned down low toward the small microphone on the podium and smiled warmly at the stunned crowd. "Hello, Akron. I'm Shaquille O'Neal, and I hate cold, heartless financial reports." A few people in the crowd gasped out loud. Cameras clicked rapidly all around the room as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Abigail opened the briefcase carefully and placed a stamped legal document on the table beside the podium. Shaq continued speaking in his calm, steady voice. My private fund has just bought this entire property directly from the city council this morning. We paid $1,200,000 for it, Shaq announced clearly. This station no longer belongs to the city. It belongs to this community now, funded by me, forever. Abigail handed Shaq a second sheet of paper. He held it up for the cameras. This also guarantees full funding for every firefighter's salary here for the next 10 years. No more budget cuts. No more closures. The crowd erupted all at once. Cheers, applause, and tears poured out from the gathered families of Akron. Tyler Brooks hugged his fellow firefighters tightly, crying without any shame at all. What would happen next to Patrick Dunn? And what fate now awaited Chief Raymond Cole under this brand new order? Raymond switched his entire attitude in an instant. He bowed slightly toward Shaq, forcing a nervous, shaking smile onto his face. Mr. O'Neill, this is truly an honor. Disciplining Firefighter Dunn was simply standard procedure to protect this station legally. Shaq didn't even look at him directly. He simply raised one giant hand, signaling for silence. The whole room went completely still. Raymond shut his mouth at once, fear creeping slowly across his pale face. Shaq walked right past Raymond, without another glance, and headed straight toward Patrick, who stood frozen near the back wall of the room. Shaq bent down low to meet Patrick at eye level, his huge frame folding carefully. He placed one massive hand gently on Patrick's shoulder. Hello, Patrick, Shaq said softly. That tire you fixed ran great the whole way home. I came back here 3 different times. I asked 11 different people in this neighborhood about you. They all told me the exact same thing, every single time, Shaq said. Patrick Dunn never turns his back on someone in need. I finally found exactly who I was looking for. Shaq pulled a second folder from his briefcase and opened it slowly. I want you to run my community safety program as a part-time director across 5 cities here in Ohio. The starting pay is $120,000 a year, Shaq said. And you can still work as a firefighter right here at Station 4, if that's what you want to do. I built this program because I grew up watching my own mother struggle, just like yours, Shaq added quietly. I want someone who remembers what it feels like to have nothing. Would Patrick accept this life-changing offer? And what would he finally say to the chief, who had once crushed him, without any mercy at all? Patrick looked down at the folder in his hands, then looked out at the families of Akron still waiting and hoping nearby. His throat tightened painfully. He nodded slowly, unable to speak at first, through the lump in his throat. Yes, he finally managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. I'll do it. For them. For my mother. For everyone who never gave up on this station. Shaq smiled and gave Patrick's shoulder a gentle squeeze before turning to face Raymond Cole, who now stood trembling alone in the corner of the crowded room. Mr. Cole, you followed every procedure perfectly, down to the smallest letter, Shaq said evenly. So under our new private management, Patrick Dunn will now be your direct supervisor here, starting today. You will report every single action and every expense straight to him from now on, Shaq said calmly, without raising his voice even once. Raymond stood frozen in place, his face drained completely of all color. Every scheme he had built so carefully came crashing down in front of him, without a single shout or angry argument from anyone. He opened his mouth once, as if to argue, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. The rules he had hidden behind for so long meant nothing here anymore. He simply lowered his head in silence, quietly accepting his new place in the station with deep, private shame. Patrick stepped slowly toward Raymond. There was no hatred at all in his eyes, only steady patience and calm resolve. Chief Cole, tomorrow we still report for the morning shift at 6 o'clock sharp. But from now on, any family that needs an extinguisher or a warm shower on a cold winter night will always be welcome here, Patrick said firmly. That's my new procedure, starting now. What would the new dawn at Fire Station 4 finally bring to the people of this community? 1 month later, the halls of Station 4 glowed with warm, golden light. The dark cloud of closure was completely gone now, replaced with fresh energy and real life. A free CPR training class was underway for 500 working families across Akron that very morning. Children laughed loudly in the hallways, while their mothers received brand new fire extinguishers, all paid for by Shaq's growing fund. Tyler Brooks walked between the rows, handing out small first aid kits to every family that came through the door. His old worries about losing his job felt like a distant memory now. Patrick Dunn stood at the front of the training room in a crisp new uniform that fit him well. His face glowed with quiet pride as he showed a young father exactly how to help his child during an emergency. His mother, Martha Dunn, sat proudly in the front row of folding chairs, her eyes shining with deep pride for her hard-working son. A nurse had stopped by earlier that week to say her heart medicine was finally fully covered, thanks to the new health benefits from Patrick's job. Martha had cried happy tears at the kitchen table that morning. In the back corner of the room, hidden quietly behind a large open door, Shaquille O'Neal watched everything unfold, with a content smile spreading slowly across his face. He didn't step up to any microphone. He didn't need cameras or loud applause from anyone in the room. He simply gave Patrick a small, knowing nod from across the hall. Then he turned quietly and walked toward his waiting SUV outside, stepping into the warm morning sun spreading across the streets of Akron. Inside the truck, Abigail looked over at him and smiled. "You never told them your real reason for choosing him, did you?" Shaq shook his head slowly, watching the station grow smaller in the side mirror. Some things don't need to be said out loud. He already knows what it means to be seen. Kindness is never a transaction, with strings quietly attached to it. When you choose to bend down and lift up a stranger in the freezing snow, life always finds a way to warm your heart back in return. Patrick Dunn simply fixed one flat tire on a freezing morning, expecting nothing at all in return. In the end, he received a quiet miracle that saved his career, his station, and the entire community he had always fought so hard to protect. The snow kept falling softly outside the station windows, the same kind of snow that once covered a stranger's flat tire on a cold January morning. Some storms bring damage. This one brought a new beginning for an entire neighborhood.